I got one that way.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our presentation. My name is Connor Griffey, and I am accompanied by Asher Delmott. And today our presentation is Lazy Employee, Busy Developer, 3 Steps to Quit Working and Keep Your Job. Now, I know you guys are thinking, great, I wasted one of my check slots on a remote work presentation. But don't worry, that won't be covered in this presentation. Now, there are some questions you might be asking yourselves.
Like, first of all, who are these guys? Well, we're systems analysts and applications developers at Emporia State University. We primarily support financial aid, human resources, payroll, and we occasionally work on some other cool projects as well. As Connor said, I'm Asher. I have a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology, and I have 8 years of experience in functional human resources at Emporia State University.
And I earned my master's degree in information technology and business administration at ESU as well. So you may also be wondering, what kind of person comes to check and presents on how to stop working? Well, at the end of the day, we're developers. We just want to code. We don't want to have to maintain and troubleshoot programs that we've already made. Copying information from one spreadsheet to another just slowly drains the life out of us. And most of all, we don't want to be a vital part of a department's workflow. We found this Bill Gates quote that represents the ideal. And you guys might have guessed it. I choose a lazy person to do a hard job because a lazy person will find an easy way to do it.
So another question you might have is, how can you get away with not doing any of those things? Connor, I'm too lazy to explain it. How about you go?
Well, before we jump into it, this presentation will use a lot of examples. So we wanted to give everyone a little bit of context. We have a couple of projects that we feel encapsulate the lazy employee, busy developer mindset that we have developed. And the first of those projects is First Day Complete. First Day Complete, or FEC, Hornet Textbook Bundle, is a program that is designed to get students their textbooks on the first day of class. The students are billed based on the number of credit hours they are currently enrolled in. And there's also an opt-in opt-out process that students can choose to opt in or out depending on whether they want to use this service or not. Since ESU had never done anything like this before, it was a completely new project. We had learned from other schools that this added several hours to their workflow, something along the lines of, like 40 hours per week. And that is not something our business office wanted to take on, so they called the lazy people.
Another project that we're going to be talking about is our birth process. So it was an existing process that we inherited. It took about 4 hours every other week in order to run the process. It involved getting a file from the state regarding employee deductions, and then pre-processing that file to identify any possible data issues. After that, any deduction changes would be applied to the appropriate tables in our database. Our task was simply to add some new deductions to that code, but that would mean that we would continue spending 4 hours every other week on this process forever. Who has 4 thumbs and didn't want to do that? These guys. So back to how we get away with being the lazy employees that don't want to do anything but code. Step 1 is learning. One of the things we always want to learn on a project is what process will require the least amount of input or interaction. So, for example, with the birth, the original process asked for pay periods, begin and end dates through several pieces of the process. On top of that, the prompts were not consistent about the format that the date should be entered or the order that the date should be entered. So needless to say, this caused the dates to be entered incorrectly on multiple occasions. As we learned more about the process and the data, we realized that our program could determine what dates it needed to use, and so no one would have to tell it what dates to use, and therefore no one would mess it up. There were also 5 parts to the birth process that each ran a series of SQL queries. We had to request the queries and then copy the output into multiple different sections of a spreadsheet. And as it turns out, payroll would then take that spreadsheet and reformat it again. Overall, the process resulted in people touching the data in too many places. So in the end, after we did our work on it, we were able to develop a way to automatically pull the results from all of the queries into a single spreadsheet, formatted in the way the payroll wanted it, so that no one had to copy and paste from one file to another or move any extra data around. Again, fewer people touching things meant fewer people to mess it up.
And the FTC process wanted to avoid asking for input wherever it was possible. There are times where data input is kind of a necessary evil. Things like charges per term and which semesters are going to be active are things that, you know, we don't have the capacity to automate. That being said, we've seen processes, for example, the birth, needing to input this data each time that the process is run, which opens you up to a lot of different types of errors. So we wanted to avoid that altogether. What we decided to do is put those things in one centralized location and then reference that location in all of our programs so that when you needed to change it, you only had to change it in one place, one time, and then, you know, the rest would figure itself out.
So we also need to learn what tools and languages are going to be most efficient for the task. With all the pre-processing that we were doing for birth, we decided to move away from PL SQL, which requires the data to be in the database, and we switched to the Python language, where we can work with data directly from the file from the state. We found that Python also simplified the process of debugging the code, so seeing what's going on as the code's running, and also made it easier to create the output files that payroll wanted. Even when we decided on Python, though, we still had to figure out, this was our first real project, and so we didn't know how to handle the data that we would need to pull in from the database for our pre-processing. We frequently had discussions where Connor lobbied for his favorite solution,
2D arrays.
and I said, no, there has to be a better way to handle this data. So we kept looking, and we found the Pandas library, which organizes the data into spreadsheet-like format, and then we can reference or modify the data based on the row, column, data value, or some combination of those.
When we began the creative process for First Day Complete, we thought we were going to use Python. We had used Python in the past for projects like birth, and it seemed like it would be a good tool for the job. However, as time went on, we realized that Python may not be the greatest tool for the job and may cause some issues in the future. Our boss, shout out Brian, recommended to us Go. Due to the nature of First Day Complete, Go was the perfect tool for the job. There are a few reasons for that. Exact decimals, great error handling, and automated testing, to name a few. When you're dealing with money, you need everything to be exact down to the cent. And with Python, sometimes some of your it may be a bit unclear what kind of data type you're using. Whereas with Go, since you have to be explicit, it's a little bit easier. So we imported a library that allowed us to use exact decimals, so we would know what we were charging the student each time. We also utilized the great error handling that Go has, and that allowed us to make simple, easy error messages so that we would know exactly what was going wrong if something were to happen. And then automated testing comes standard in Go's library, and it allows us to go into the code and make changes without having to worry about if there was some unintended consequence with the data being pushed into the tables, and it breaking something else that we didn't intend.
Another thing we need to learn is how the end users plan to use the program. So with birth, we wanted to get the process 100% automated, so that no one would need to look at the data at all. Well, that requires a high confidence in the programming. And do you remember I mentioned this was our first big project? On top of that, our payroll office is a see it to believe it kind of group anyways. And so as hard as it was to get the birth loaded correctly with the previous process, they naturally wanted to see what the data looked like before we put it into the tables. So consequently, we split the birth into two pieces so that payroll could have a manual review to, after the pre-processing was done, to see what would happen before it actually happened. Also, when IT was running the birth process, it was important to have the process done as soon as possible when the file was received. In case there were any errors, like dates being entered incorrectly, that would give us time to fix it before payroll actually had to get processed. After the simplified process was handed back to payroll, it was so simple, they didn't worry about running it right away. We didn't expect that, so when we built the process to figure out what date it was going to use, they waited long enough that our assumption was now wrong. So we had to go back in and correct our program so they would work with the way that they were running it instead of the way we had been running it.
We met with the business office several times when coming up with First Day Complete. In-depth knowledge of what they wanted and needed made programming a lot easier than if we were to just make assumptions. We worked hard to make sure the program would always correct a student's billing record if something got off somewhere. But we recognized that there would be times that the business office may want to do something different with the student's record than our program had the rules for. As a result, we implemented something that would allow them to override what our process assigned to a given student. For example, our program charges students based on a given deadline day. Whatever credit hours they have on that deadline day is what they're going to be charged for. There are times where, you know, the business office may make an exception to a given student and refund them past that deadline day. That is where that override comes in. They can come in and give that student a refund, and our program won't touch what they've done. Like Asher talked about, we had to come back and modify our birth solution because we didn't consider how the payroll office would use the program. After that, we began consulting with end users more often, and that override concept was developed based on that. So the next slide is about coding. So step 2 of our mentality when it comes to developing these projects. Write it yourself. Since First Day Complete was brand new, this is pretty self-explanatory. Writing something from scratch allows you to make a lot of the decisions yourself creatively. Once you it can be a little bit daunting starting a program like this because there's so much to do. But once you start to get into it a little bit more, it allows you to be creative and do things exactly how you want. When we received the First Day Complete project, we didn't have a lot of creative direction. A lot of the early days of First Day Complete were Asher, myself, and our boss just kind of having brainstorming sessions, trying to figure out how we were going to do this. After we finished the program, we identified potential issues that we were going to have in the future. So we went back to fix those issues, but we also used the knowledge we had gained through the development process to nearly completely overhaul our code base that we had already written. But the value in the initial write was we could gain a lot of the knowledge that we were going to use. And if you were just maintaining a regular code base or just maintaining the code base that we had already written, we may not have that exact same knowledge.
And since birth was an existing process, we inherited a lot of code. We found that one of the best ways to read someone else's SQL is to ask, what is this code trying to do and how would I do it? Then actually write out how you would do it and compare the two. After you've done that, you can ask yourself, what is my code missing? And is that a problem? Is one way more accurate or efficient? In our case, we found that our new code was both. As far as accuracy, there were a few minor errors in logic with the original code that were causing a few records to be missed, which we confirmed with payroll to make sure which one was the correct logic. For efficiency, let me tell you, the existing code had one query that was 158 lines long, including 6 unions. When you realize the other 10 deductions were written similarly, you understand we're talking about a lot of code. We were able to modify the queries using and or statements to combine all of them into a single query that was 26 lines. In all, we removed 5,600 lines of code, an 88% reduction. In the end, we had confidence that the code was doing what it was supposed to do. We knew how it worked, and we made it easier for the future.
So the next point of code is make it so easy anyone can do it, i.e. not. Oh,
There's my chart of
okay, yeah.
code before and after. Forgot about that.
So anyways, make it so easy anyone can do it, not you. In the past, First Day Complete may have looked a lot more like other projects. The opt-in, opt-out file from Barnes & Noble, checking for updated credit hours, and adding charges and refunds to students' accounts would be separate pieces. Each one would require checking and rechecking temp tables to make sure the data looks correct. There would be Excel spreadsheets galore, and there would be stopping points for error handling on each piece. We were well aware of that when we began designing First Day Complete, and we wanted to avoid that as much as possible. We strived to make something more simple. We created modules to handle each of the separate processes, but integrated them all into one program. Instead of temp tables, we used structs. Instead of Excel spreadsheets, we used built-in logic. And instead of stopping after every job runs and checking for errors, we integrated the error handling throughout the entire process and have them report automatically to us so that they can be resolved before the next run. And so that meant that no one would have to go through and sift through the errors when things had broken. And since implementation, we have entered around 99.9% of charges exactly as expected, and it's only touched once per semester. It got so easy that no one had to do it.
And Connor mentioned, some of the ways that the old processes that we had in mind as we were developing First Day Complete. So BRF was one of them. With BRF, the old process involved running SQL scripts, checking the data, copying the output to an Excel file, running more SQL scripts, checking more data, copying more data to the output file, running more. Okay, you guys get the idea. The updated process automatically pulls the file from the state, cleans the data, and says, here's what I will load, here's what I won't load. Payroll looks at that output, decides whether it's good or not, and generally it is good. They click the button to load it.
So the next point that we have is to future-proof it, no hard coding. I talked a little bit about this. Sorry, handling errors and exceptions. My bad. For First Day Complete, one of the best decisions that we made was the error handling implemented around vendor data. At first, our code would just skip anyone that we deemed to be ineligible for the program. And that was great, but later in development, we realized the data that we were receiving had students showing as opted in that were ineligible for the program. Once we realized that, we reported it to Barnes & Noble, and it led them to discover a bug in their own platform that was allowing ineligible students to manually opt into the program. We continue to filter that data even today, and we report to them when we see them.
And with the old BRF process, there was not a great error handling setup. It committed changes after every step of the process. However, if something broke during one of the later steps, we would have to restore all of the data that we had already committed based on backups. We had to use the backup tables, which would involve changing millions of records to restore to backups. So the updated process did not commit any changes until the end. That way, if an error occurs, the process would automatically just roll back. Any changes that had happened up to that point, the error can be fixed, and then the process can be run again. No need to restore any tables, no need to touch millions of records.
So the next piece is future-proof it, no hard coding. Like I said before, we touched a little bit on this on First Day Complete earlier. Creating First Day Complete was difficult enough as it was, but we didn't want to have to go back and change hard-coded dates and charges each new semester when things needed to change. That is why we created one single location to change those things. That way we knew where to find what needed to be changed, and we only had to change it if it was necessary.
And as I mentioned earlier, the whole purpose of the BRF project that we took on originally was just to add a couple new deductions to it. We realized once we got in there that we didn't want to go through this every time there was a new or changing deduction. We found that all of the deductions have a type, and all of the deductions of the same type are handled the same way. So we removed all of the hard-coded deduction codes that change regularly, and we referenced the more stable deduction types. So now it doesn't matter which vendor we have for health insurance or what plan we have for health insurance and how that code changes. If it's a type of health insurance, we will handle it the same way. We don't have to change the code. So that brings us to step 3, which is set it and forget it. This is the third and final step. So when we're done coding, we want to schedule anything we can, and everything else we get back to the department. So for the birth process, we have a scheduled SFTP that automatically checks for the file on the day that we're expecting to receive it, and it pulls it in when available. As soon as that SFTP is successful, our program automatically runs pre-processing on the data and then emails our payroll department, letting them know that that output is ready for review. Remember, that's because they wanted to review it. Then they have to click one button to finish running the process.
We scheduled First Aid Complete to run on regular intervals to update student charges as real time as we possibly could. And then we also scheduled the FTP. It just runs in the background all the time unless there's any kind of error, and then it will notify everyone that is involved with the process. Once we finished the First Aid Complete program, it no longer required much manual processing at all. The most manual part that there is now is a reconciliation, and we gave that back to the business office. So there's really nothing active that we do with First Aid Complete.
So we do have another small example for this slide, which really helps explain why we like to set and forget it. So here we have some code that we inherited, and although the code's blacked out, you can see the comments. This is buried somewhere in the middle of 600 lines of code. And it tells us that for one pay period out of the year, we need to comment out the lines that are at the beginning and end of a block comment. That way, the code that's normally block commented will run. Then when payroll is processed for that pay period, we need to come back and remove the comments we added so that now the code will be block commented and it won't run for the rest of the year. We don't want to remember to do this. We don't want our payroll department to remember we need to do this. We don't want our payroll department to need us to do this. We don't want to do this.
So you may be, to return a little bit to the earlier part of this. Okay, really, how lazy are they? So thinking back to the ideal, I choose a lazy person to do a hard job because a lazy person will find the easy way to do it. Well, Bill, making the slideshow is pretty hard, but it got a lot easier when we copied the third slide for this slide. So again, just to refresh, we just want the code. We don't want it to be a hassle for ourselves to go back and change things unnecessarily. We want to develop code the first time to be self-sustaining and very easily maintainable. We don't want to have to push buttons and type data, and we don't want our end users to have to do that if they don't need to. We also don't want others to physically need us. In the past, workflows have depended on IT members physically. So if the IT member was out to lunch or on vacation, that would completely slow that process and stop that workflow. We wanted to write code that's good enough so that we no longer have to be involved in these processes, because that speeds things up for the departments and allows us to develop more things like this to help others.
So by using these 3 steps we've outlined, here are some examples of work that we and/or the departments we serve have quit doing. So this is the end of our presentation. So with that, we'd like to thank you for attending. We hope you gained something out of this, or at least found it entertaining. And we'll now take questions if anyone has any. Yes.
Could you speak on the process of migrating your code base from Python to Go? How much sort of development time did that take? Was it a simple process, or did it require?
So with the First Aid Complete process, really, when we had started, we we had just began thinking of writing it in Python. We didn't have to migrate any existing code base. So we may have gotten a little bit into it, but I think that it was pretty clear that Go was gonna be the right tool pretty soon. Yeah.
Well, so to that point though, we didn't have Go experience before that. Our supervisor did. So he had worked with us, he suggested Go. So we did have to spend time actually learning the language. So, you know, we're looking at different resources online, trying to figure out, okay, I kind of know how to do this in Python, but how do I do that in Go? So like, you know, structs were a completely new idea to us, but they ended up being an important part. And I would say even as we learned how to code in Go, that had improved our Python as well. We picked up things that you can do in Python that we weren't aware of before. Yes.
So I was taught, if you want something done, give it to the busy guy. You guys just blew my mind.
Yeah, we were hoping to have some of that. Well, and I guess to that point though, like, you know, we talked a lot about being lazy, but all the three steps that we talked about involve a lot of work. So we are busy people, right? We're the busy developers, we're the lazy employees. We don't, like we said, we don't want to be spending the time doing the day-to-day operations. We want to make it simple enough that the departments can do those. And therefore we spend a lot of time working on new projects. And I think also to that point, you know, when we helped payroll office with the BRF and they said, oh, it went from 4 hours now to this thing that runs in 5 minutes with 2 button clicks or 1 button click. You know, they said, hey, actually, we have something else that maybe you can help us with. Where before, you know, that was not even on the radar. Yes.
I've been coding for way too long, but I've always thought the time put in by a developer to do it right, so that the user didn't have to completely do it over and over again in the future was well worth our time. Done well.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
So I am not a developer by any means, but I see a lot of how this could be applied to just general project management at a high level. Is that something that your institution is doing, or is there like a pushback to the approach that you've taken?
Yeah, me. Put on that.
I mean, I think that when we got there, I think that a lot of the development that we had been doing, like that had been done, did require a little bit more hands-on. So I think that when we came in and started, you know, doing things a little bit more automated, there was a lot of like appetite for that. Like, you know, our boss, you know, project management, like a lot of like, because I don't know that it was really thought of before, like people didn't really, like, it wasn't like Asher said for payroll, it wasn't really on people's radar. So when we began doing it, I think it, you know, kind of pushed that type of ideal. So.
Yeah, and so a little bit of historical context. We had a lot of people in the department that we work in, administrative solutions. We had a core group of people who had been there a long time. And then a lot of them left around the same time. So we came in kind of, you know, to a fresh department, and we see a lot of, well, this is the way things used to be, but there was also not any push of like, they have to continue to be that way. And maybe even a little bit of push of, hey, if you guys can think of a different way, like kind of go for it. And so, so we had that flexibility to be able to change the way that things have been done, you know, coming in with fresh ideas and actually implementing those. And I think that has kind of helped push us. And I think we're kind of on the cusp of, we're doing things that hadn't necessarily been seen before in a lot of areas. And so I think there's a growing appetite. I think our university is moving more in that direction. Yes.
Did you guys find that code comment where you had the uncomment, recomment, that kind of thing? Did you find that in step 1 or step 2? You learn it, oh, it's there, we know that, or if you're starting coding it.
Yeah, so actually, I told you our payroll department is a see it to believe it group. Well, they're also they are very on it. They know their stuff. So they knew this had to be done. So they reached out to us at, you know, at the appropriate time and said, hey, you know, the previous person always did this for us. Can you do this for us? And we said, we'll do it one time. But we're gonna do it now so that you can run this process, and then we're gonna fix this before next year. So it never happens again. And the funny thing, so we have, you know, the way that we keep some of our stuff secure is we do our stuff in, you know, a test system, and then we ask someone to put it into production for us. And so there is a level of review there. And so when we said, hey, can you push this into production? You know, it's a small little change in the code. So the person, you know, is reviewing the code, and they have nothing to do with the payroll processing or anything. They just, you know, help us put it into production. But they emailed back and said, hey, thank you for doing that.
Yes, sort of piggybacking off that. So, I mean, you've got this whole list of pain points here that you've sort of breezed past with your new system. Did you have a process for finding those, or did you contact the stakeholders and they said, oh, this annoying thing happens? Or was it the sort of thing where like you're just looking through the code base, like, well, that's a terrible decision. I'm gonna make a new one, not do that anymore.
Yeah. Do you want to start with that, or?
Sure, I would say it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think that on First to Complete in particular, since it was new, it was like we had done some stuff for payroll, and I think that the business office had seen that a little bit, and they're like, hey, it would make sense for these guys to work on that. So, but then I feel like with things like BRF, I think initially you had taken it when it was in its 4-hour manual process. And we were just kind of like, yeah, there's no way. So.
Yeah, so to add a little bit more to that, I mentioned earlier that our primary areas of support are payroll, human resources, and financial aid. I also had 8 years of experience in human resources at the university. So when I came over to the IT department, I said, hey, I've got a list of all these things that we're gonna make better. So some of these things we knew in advance. Like I knew that the BRF, you know, as we're seeing it being run, we knew that it could be changed. And having the HR knowledge that I had, I was able to say like, okay, I know this can be better because this is what we're trying to do, and it's not that hard. You know, I do it manually. Now we just need to build a process to do it. So a lot of payroll things we could see that we had some background in that. With financial aid, neither of us had any particular background in that area. So we didn't do a lot with them to begin with, but eventually we kind of started. It's like, hey, you know, we just have this thing that we kind of need some help with. So we work with them on it. And then again, they saw that and they said, oh yeah, like that actually works really good. There's this other thing that we have that's kind of similar. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. So that's kind of how it works. Some of these things we did just find on our own. We said, hey, I know they're out there. Let's go fix them. And then some of these things, they reach out to us specifically. Yes.
To bounce off that question a little bit, I tell my users, if you have to do something once, that's why you have a job, that's why you get paid. If you have to do it twice, think about why. If you have to do it 3 times, please compensate.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Because you probably don't really have to do it.
Yep.
Computers are really good at repeating.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yep. We see that with some of these financial aid processes. It's like they're running a banner, you know, they're running a set of banner jobs, but they're like, well, I have to run it for this term, and then I have to run it for this term, and then I have to, dude, we can do that for you.
I support finance, so there's a lot of the same kind of thing. It's, you're always looking at this period, not this fiscal year.
Yep. Like,
You guys touched on your education in Asher's HR experience, but how long have you guys actually been in IT as developers?
So I think we kind of started about the same time. I think I started in March, you started in like July of 2022.
yeah, full time.
Yeah.
So it was like 2.5 years or so. I'll let you guys think a little bit more. There was one question we had through the app. So it said, what tools do you use to increase your work efficiency? Do you want to say anything?
I'll let you guys. 'Cause you
Okay.
said, yeah.
So one tool that we use, I mean, just to make our lives easier, we do have a scheduling tool, Atomic. So we use that to help with the automation of a lot of processes. We'll write the code. to make it do whatever we need to do. And then we throw it into the automation or the scheduling so that it can run on whatever timer it needs to be on. We also use a Git repository to help us track changes and track issues. So as we're working on code, we can see what has changed over time and record any issues, and then whether those have been resolved or whether they're still outstanding. Other questions from the group here? Yes.
What do you do for documentation and versioning?
So I'd say mainly Git, Git, commit messages are one way that is like really good to say like what each change is doing. And then I think for versioning, we do like releases. So if we, put something into production, we'll put in a 1.0 release, so that we can always restore back to that release if, we've been coding and then we broke something and then, something happens. But so generally I'd say Git is the best way that we document and then version.
Yeah, so we also have typically with every project, we have a README, which talks about like which tables are related, different parts of the process, what they're trying to do, and those general things. Anyone else?
How did you transfer or transition from the HR to developing? How did you learn programming?
Yeah, well, so a little bit about the transition. So like I said, I worked in HR for 8 years, and in my time there, I tried to get into, I did data entry at some points. I also tried to get into working on any tech projects that we had. IT is helping us with something, but there needs to be an HR person involved to say, here's what we need. I tried to be that person. And then there was a position that supported HR payroll come open in IT. I said, hey, I think that'd be a good fit. So I felt like I already had a mind for logic and data. I knew where the data lived in Banner. And so then it was just kind of learning, SQL, learning Python. I did have one Visual Basic programming class in college, which kind of taught me general concepts, but I'm not using any Visual Basic.
Did you just learn it through the school then?
So so I did I more or less self-taught SQL. We had some books and, Google searching and that sort of thing. I did do a Python boot camp. So like a 1 to 2 week course to learn kind of some basics in Python. And then again, Googling that sort of stuff. There's plenty of online resources. And then also, sometimes you can ask some AI for a little bit of help too, but you also need, those answers typically aren't everything you need unless it's a simple question. So they're not just going to do it for you yet. Yes.
How rigorously do you test these processes before you put them in a product?
You can.
Okay.
You can start.
I'd say pretty rigorously. Well, and it kind of depends on the project, but I mean, we're running multiple, a lot. I mean, for First Day Complete, we ran a lot of test cases. I think we did basically every combination that we could think of where it's they're opted out, but they have, they've opted in, then opted out, then opted in, but then they dropped to 0 hours, then they opted out, then they opted it. So we did a lot of testing, I'd say, for First Day Complete.
Yeah. Yeah. And specifically for First Day Complete, it was very interesting testing because we had to account for, over time. It's not just a one time, are they in or are they out? We're consistently checking for changes in opt-in and opt-out status because students can go back and forth between those, for as many times as they want within the opt-in out period. There's also changes in enrollment that we need to be looking at. So they can be changing enrollment at any time. And so we had to consider all of those things and how they compound over time. We've already charged them this much. Now they've dropped their credit hours. So we don't want to, are we changing the bill appropriately to only adjust for the accurate change in credit hours, not, doing something crazy, like charging them again, but only less than the original charge. So. And as Connor mentioned before, we also put automated testing into the first day complete program. So we have code written in there that says, hey, if I give you this data, I expect this back. Now, run the code that we've written with this data and tell me if you get back what I told you I expect. And so that way we can make changes to the code and say, hey, run our tests. And as long as it says, yep, I'm still getting the data you expected back, then we know it's good to go. And if it ever says, hey, now I'm getting something different than you expected, we know that we broke something and we can go change it. Any other questions? All right, we are at our 40 minutes, so we'll go ahead and stop here. Thanks again.